we had these claims meetings, and we kept seeing people hurting themselves in light aircraft for the same reasons at the same rates year after year after year after year. And after I was finally made president, not finally made president, after I became president, and I've been in the industry for 20 years, I was really bothered by that. I said that we're doing something terribly wrong in aviation. So we keep going for a technological answer to why people keep doing these things. And there was always this sort of Darwinian attitude of, well, that's because these people are lower on the gene pool, and therefore they're going to die in the airplane anyway. There's not a thing you can do about it. I just found that to be unacceptable. Also, because we were a direct writer of insurance, a direct insurer, we had a relationship with the person before the accident, and we settled the claim after the accident. And that was unique within our industry. And I began to realize that because I could go back and look at the interaction with the customer before they came to grief, as well as what happened in the claim and the loss and how it came about, that I could go back and study that and start to see some patterns. And there were some definite patterns, some behavioral patterns. I gave several examples in the workshop today, but I began to notice that was a unique perspective that God in His providence had given to me because of the nature of our business. None of our competitors could have that. And I just felt it incumbent upon me to share what we were learning with the general aviation public. So the last several years of my career as president of Avemco, I spent a great deal of time going out into the general aviation public and talking about how people got themselves in trouble in airplanes. And I kind of summarized it, trying to overly simplify things. I came down to a comment that I tried to drive home and leave people with, and that is that people got hurt in airplanes not so much because of what they knew or didn't know, but because of what they cared about. Invariably, just to give you the classic example, there was one loss where a gentleman ran out of gas and about a mile short of his home airport, killed himself, his wife, and his 2 granddaughters. And we found out the guy was getting a 10-cent per gallon discount on his gas at his home airport. So just think about that. Where was his head? We don't know, but we strongly suspect he was being driven by that 10-cent per gallon discount on fuel, rather than the safety of flight. Another thing that was very interesting about that particular loss is when I went back and looked at the narratives of our conversations, our phone conversations with this particular customer, every one of them was contentious. He, not on our side, but on his side, he was calling to tell us something we were doing wrong. We were charging too much money, we were requiring too many underwriting requirements. Everything was always contentious. And it was just very interesting. That was a common pattern that we saw. Another common pattern we would see is that people were not paying their bills. People who didn't pay their bills on time tended to be more likely to have a loss, it seemed. And we came to the conclusion that wasn't because they didn't have the money to afford the airplane. It's because their lives were somewhat reactive and chaotic, rather than proactive and carefully managed. In an airplane, you need to be proactive. You need to be thinking ahead about what might go wrong, rather than just responding to the latest, I got to pay my insurance bill now. Those are just some of the things that we learned. And so for the last few years of my career, I spent a great deal of time out in the field sharing that information. We also had the privilege of sponsoring a gentleman who was doing extremely interesting research in the field of, he had done a lot of work in the field of dentistry and medicine and the military. He was a professor at the Air Force Academy, and he was also a general aviation pilot. We got to sponsor his work in that quantified and made much more scientific what I was just feeling by my gut. And it was an enormous blessing, and I believe in my heart, can't prove it actuarially, but I believe in my heart there are people that are alive today because of the work that we did that may not have been otherwise. And that was I saw of God's redemptive purpose for having put me in that position in the first place.